Welcome into the Stone Zone here on the Roger Stone Show. Our focus today is on the island nation of Cuba, some 90 miles off our shore. As I think many folks know, my wife, Nidia Bertrand de Espinosa, is a Cuban American. She was born to Cuban parents here in Washington, D.C., at a time that her father, Lieutenant Colonel Joaquin Bertrand, was the military attaché for the Cuban embassy, and my mother-in-law, Olga Bertrand, she worked in a drugstore and took in sewing in order to make ends meet. When Batista fell and Castro came to power, my father-in-law received orders to return to Havana for briefings. His bags were packed and he was prepared to leave the next morning when a friendly man from the CIA knocked on the door to warn him not to return to Cuba because his name was on a list of individuals to be eliminated. My wife's family lost everything, their home, their savings, their insurance, everything was back in Cuba. It is also interesting that just this past week, one of my wife's cousins returned from Cuba, and she describes the situation there as dire. There is no food. There is particularly no water. People are literally dying of thirst because there is no potable water. There is no gasoline. There are no rubber tires. There are no car parts. But most importantly, there is no electricity, which means through most of the day, there are no telephone calls. They tell about the preparation of food. You are given a potato and you boil it. And you cut the potato into 6 pieces. Each day you eat 1 piece, and on the 7th day, you drink the water in which the potato has been cooked. The people of Cuba have been putting up with enduring blackouts, water shortages, food scarcity, inadequate medical supplies, political repression, and the denial of free elections. Cuban dissidents, of course, cannot organize openly, cannot establish independent political parties, can't criticize the dictatorship freely, or rely upon any kind of impartial justice system. If one holds a birthday party for one of one's children, then a block captain from the Communist Party must be invited. Doors and windows, particularly in Havana, are not allowed because the party chieftains need to be able to see into your home to ensure that you are not having some kind of meeting plotting against the government. Communist dictatorship in Cuba has spent decades cultivating relations with Marxist radicals, welcoming activists to Havana, immersing them in revolutionary ideology, and helping build political networks capable of mobilizing demonstrations and disorder inside the United States. Recent reporting in the New York Post particularly concerned the scope of these activities, and they should make every patriotic American demand an immediate and comprehensive investigation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio published an extraordinarily compelling 94-page report last week with the history of communist repression in Cuba. Some critics said that it was recycled. I think it was important to actually have all of this information in one place. J. Michael Waller, former intelligence guy that I admire, pointed that out. And if you haven't read it, the book The Fourth Floor by Ambassador Earl E.T. Smith, who was our last ambassador to Cuba, is a really compelling and stunning story of how our State Department, with the assistance of the New York Times, installed Fidel Castro into power, creating this media image of Castro as a modern-day Robin Hood, the George Washington of his country. But for those who live in New York or New Jersey, for more than 4 decades, the communist dictatorship in Cuba gave sanctuary to Joanne Chesimard, better known as Tara Shakur. She was a convicted murderer and fugitive who escaped an American prison after a jury found her guilty of the cold-blooded murder of New Jersey State Trooper Werner Forster. On May 2nd, 1973, Trooper Forster answered a routine traffic stop on the New Jersey Turnpike and confronted members of the violent Black Liberation Army. The encounter ended with Forster shot and murdered. Chesimard was arrested and convicted of first-degree murder, but in 1979 she escaped prison and fled to Cuba, where Fidel Castro personally granted her political asylum. Every successive Cuban government has contemptuously rejected repeated American demands for her extradition, choosing instead to shield one of the FBI's most wanted terrorists and convicted cop killers. Now, there's no moral ambiguity here, only deliberate evil. A regime that shelters, celebrates, lionizes, and elevates a convicted murder of an American police officer is broadcasting exactly what it is, a criminal enterprise that rewards political violence when it serves its ideology. Cuba did not merely refuse to hand over the fugitive, it transformed Joanne Chesimard into a revolutionary heroine while forcing the family of the state trooper Warner and the men and women of the New Jersey State Police to watch Justin openly mocked a mere 90 miles from our shore. Every tribute the Castro regime and its successors have paid to Tara Shakur is a deliberate insult to Trooper Forster's sacrifices and to every police officer who is sworn to wear a badge in defense of this country. Cuban dictatorship embraces a cop killer is one of the clearest proofs of its long-standing character. A government that glorifies terrorists, protects murderers, and spits on the rule of law when convenient. No civilized nation should romanticize, excuse, or softbile a regime that grants sanctuary to a convicted killer of an American police officer. This is not resistance. This is evil, naked, calculated, cruel, and unrepentant. At this time, however, because of Donald Trump's deft moves in Venezuela, the Cuban regime has no oil, which is where they were getting most of their oil. When a hostile regime finances, trains, encourages, and assists political activists operating on American soil, that activity cannot be dismissed as a cultural exchange, or humanitarian solidarity, or constitutionally protected dissent. It must be examined as a potential national security threat, because that's what it is. The latest allegations concerning Cuba's support for American radicalism fit a pattern that reaches back generations. For decades, trips to Cuba have functioned as a form of political education for activists who admire revolutionary movements and despise the constitutional order of the United States. The Veneceromonos Brigade brought Americans to the island under the banner of solidarity, agricultural work, and opposition to the United States. Participants were exposed to the mythology of the Cuban Revolution and presented with a carefully manufactured image of a utopian communist society. The dictatorship portrays itself as heroic, egalitarian, and anti-imperialist while concealing the political prisoners, the secret police, the rationing, the poverty, the censorship, and the desperation that defines daily life for ordinary Cubans. Some Americans who entered this ideological pipeline later became involved in militant organizations. These include, of course, the terror organization, the Weather Underground in the 1960s and the early 1970s, as well as other revolutionary movements of that era. Let's not forget that Barack Hussein Obama launched his political career from the living room of Weather Underground leader Bill Ayers. That history matters because political extremism does not develop in a vacuum. It's nourished by organizations, money, training, and the like. Now, of course, the Cuban regime accuses us who ask these questions and point out this brutality as McCarthyism. The phrase McCarthyism is now deployed whenever investigators approach organizations favored by the political left. It's intended to end the inquiry before the evidence can be examined. That tactic must no longer succeed. Asking who funds these organizations is not persecution. Requiring foreign agents to register is not censorship. Investigating coordinated relations with hostile governments is not authoritarianism, and enforcing laws against violence, arson, sanctions evasion, undisclosed foreign lobbying, and material support to the brutal Cuban regime is not an attack on democracy. It's a basic function of a sovereign republic, the United States of America. The hypocrisy of the Cuban regime, as I say, is staggering. Our family and countless other members of the Cuban exile community know the truth about this regime because our families, my in-laws, have paid the price. They remember with horror the confiscated property, the destroyed businesses, the divided families, the political prisoners, the firing squads, and the dangerous journeys into exile. Their testimony carries great moral weight, far greater moral weight, than the slogans of privileged American activists who visit Havana for this carefully managed political theater. Cuban people don't need lectures from American socialists about romanticizing their oppressors. What the Cuban people need are freedom, representative government, private property, religious liberty, and unalloyed freedom. Donald Trump and Secretary Marco Rubio seem centered on that course. President Trump has correctly restored anti-communists to the center of American foreign policy, particularly in this hemisphere. His administration should intensify sanctions enforcement, expose Cuban intelligence in this country, and influence, as well as influence operations, support democratic dissidents, and deny legitimacy to organizations that function as propaganda vehicles for Havana. Thank you for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show. Coming up, by the way, Ken Khachigian, speechwriters for President Ronald Reagan and a speechwriter for President Richard Nixon, talks to us about the phenomena of Nixonmaxxing and the new and renewed interest the presidency of Richard M. Nixon has received. Go away, don't go away. We'll be right back. And we're back in the Stone Zone. We're focusing on the Marxist regime in Cuba, a particularly brutal regime. Mrs. Stone, who is of Cuban-American descent, promised that she would make picadillo, maduros, and plantains tonight if I spoke about the plight of the Cuban people on the show today, so I'm happy to have done so. Meanwhile, in this same hemisphere, Daniel Ortega, who has held Nicaragua under dictatorial control for nearly 2 decades, announced on July 19th that he was commemorating the 47th anniversary of the 1979 Sandinista Revolution, the Marxist uprising that helped lead him, with Cuban backing, to power. He declared there would be no more elections, openly dropping any more remaining pretense of democracy. This is really kind of funny because there hasn't been a fair election in Nicaragua since then. There'll be no more elections, Ortega declared, railing against his longtime adversary, the United States. Parties put in place by the Yankees, put in place by the Somoza regime. Somoza has been dead for almost 50 years. Coming back to power, that story is over. He repeated emphatically, never, 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 typical of a senile 80-year-old. Ortega voiced strong solidarity with the regimes in Cuba and Venezuela, doesn't seem to understand that the regime in Venezuela has been taken captive and the regime in Cuba is collapsing, fiercely criticizing any potential U.S. military intervention in Cuba while denouncing the United States and the empires because there are empires everywhere. I think Daniel Ortega's around the bend. Ortega announced that his government would work with the Sandinista-controlled National Assembly to elect a wall or barrier of walls against the coup plotters and the traitors, ensuring no matter how much money the Yankees give them, opposition forces will never be able to overturn his government. Ortega, of course, has been a central figure in Nicaraguan politics since the 1979 Sandinista Revolution, which helped lead the Cuban him to power with Cuban backing. From 79 to 85, he was a member of the Junta of the National Reconstruction. He was a coordinator of that junta from 1980 on, immediately after the Sandinista revolutionary victory. From 1985 to 1990, he was the president of Nicaragua, elected in 1984, then defeated in the 1990 elections. I guess that he won't be taking that chance again. From 1990 to 2007, he was in opposition out of power. Then he got elected president in 2011, re-elected in 2016, re-elected in 2021, and has been continuously ruling since January of 2007. He's currently co-president with his wife, Rosario Murillo, after constitutional changes that, of course, extended terms and entrenched one-family control. This marks an explicit end to even the facade of electoral competition. The next election had been theoretically scheduled for November of 2027. This is not Ortega's first assault on the democratic processes. In 1921, he declared himself the winner with over 75% of the vote after jailing every viable opposition presidential candidate months before the election, a vote widely condemned by international observers as completely illegitimate. The Ortega-Murillo regime has long been described as a dictatorship and has faced repeated U.S. and UN sanctions for repression, corruption, and human rights abuses. Opposition figures in exile and analysts see the announcement as a sign of weakness and further entrenchment of a family dynasty, with Ortega appearing frail in his rare public appearances and about out of sight entirely for the last 61 days. No, the authoritarian rule of Ortega is not the future. The future, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio knows, will be freedom for the people of Nicaragua. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Stone Zone, right here in the Roger Stone Show, because I myself received a presidential pardon in a classic case of lawfare, government overreach, corrupt prosecutors, a biased judge, a biased jury forewoman, a rigged jury, withheld exculpatory evidence by the grace of God and through the power of prayer and the will of President Donald Trump. I was spared what I think was probably been a lonely death in a dank Georgia prison. But because of that, many people who are themselves the target of lawfare, who are themselves the target of governmental overreach and prosecutorial corruption and political trial, reach out to me for help and advice. Chris Mazzei and his wife Erin are two such people. Chris has been with us in the Stone Zone before. Their story is outrageous. It's as outrageous as it is heartbreaking. And Chris joins us now. Chris, welcome back into the Stone Zone.
Thanks for having me, Roger. And I hope next time I can come on, it's under better circumstances. But we got to keep fighting here.
Yes, indeed. Never give up. That's one of the lessons of my mentor, one Richard Milhouse Nixon. In my view, what you have is a textbook case of weaponized prosecution. Chris and his wife took out a PPP loan during the pandemic to produce a TV series called Ohana about organized crime and government corruption in Hawaii, following written legal guidance from a loan originator that could have used projected payroll figures to qualify, something that was very standard in traditional SBA programs. They weren't hiding anything. It turns out almost 90% of the loan was either repaid or had never even been used before they were charged and sentenced. Yet, instead of working with the family to get to the truth, prosecutors in Hawaii came after both of them for the headlines. Federal prosecutors not only seized their assets a full year before charges were filed and forced their home into foreclosure, but then they went further. They actually threatened to criminally charge Chris's 78-year-old mother if they didn't accept a plea deal or if they insisted that exculpatory evidence be submitted to the court. That's not justice, that's coercion. But it didn't stop there. Just 10 days before the Mazzeis were sentenced, federal agents showed up at the foreclosure auction that the prosecutor had forced, and they were bidding on the family's property that had over $1 million in equity, using the very funds seized from Chris and his wife for the bid. Same government that framed them. This is just as far as trying to profit off the home they took from the family. So this is what I mean when I say weaponization, and this is what it looks like in real life. Erin has already been sent to prison, has done her time. Now the family faces Chris's upcoming surrender date on August 20th. Today, Chris is back to give us some updates on his continued fight before he loses his voice and to explain why he's urgently asking the president for a pardon that would finally bring true justice to the family. So, Chris, last time we talked, your family had already been through hell. Now you're staring at an August 20th surrender date. How is that deadline hanging over your home, your family, your kids, your life today?
Roger, it's a bunch of different emotions, obviously. I mean, you went through something similar. Just the roller coaster ride of a prosecution or a persecution, in my opinion. But the stuff recently going on, part of me, some days I wake up and I feel defeated, but then I have that poster in our house hanging in our living room of your quote. You're not, about being defeated, and it's not over until you quit. So I think of that every day. So that's what kind of gives me the motivation to continue this fight, even though the clock is ticking a lot faster now because we're under a month. But I mean, right now, just in general, our family's got a lot of stuff going on. I mean, we're literally in the process of moving as we speak, because we need to move to a new house. But then, I mean, our oldest son, who's been dealing with anxiety ever since Aaron got taken away, there's milestones coming up. He's starting high school. He's literally starting high school, I think, 2 days before I go in. And then, your freshman year of high school, you're going to learn to drive. Like, those things I'm going to miss out on teaching him. So that's where the emotion comes in, and it kind of breaks my heart that this is going to happen. And he, unless somebody steps in, at this age, we have 2 boys, and at this age, they need their dad. I mean, I built up this, when Aaron was gone, tremendous relationship with them. I was trying to keep life as normal as possible, and would still take them on trips to Disneyland or SeaWorld, or just let's go to the zoo, let's go to the beach. Like, so we built this bond. And even for Luca, our oldest, when he was going through the anxiety, like, there was times I had to pick him up from school because he thought he was, he was 13 at the time, and he thought he was having a heart attack, because the anxiety overtakes your body. And that, I was able to get him through that, and then we were able to get him help. But that bond that was generated over this past year and a half while Aaron was gone, like, is now going to be ripped away from him. And my youngest son, Nico, as well. So there's a lot of emotions, and it's, as you know, like, Aaron was on home confinement the last time we were on, and then she got that monitor off, and we've been able to kind of feel like a normal family, bits and pieces here. Like, we did take them on little mini vacations because she still can't travel outside of California unless she gets written permission from the court. But there are days where it felt like it was our life before 2020, and then there's just that lingering cloud that kind of comes back in. You know, you're looking at the weather report and it's like, oh yeah, like this isn't over yet. Like we still have this, you know, this horrible cloud hanging over us, and it's not ending yet.
I'm completely familiar with it. My family and I lived with 2.5 years of it. We had to hear virtually every week on CNN a leak, of course, no official announcement, a leak that my arrest was imminent and that I was a Russian traitor. You should try that out for a while. It is. I do think that you have done the one thing that I urge others to do, and that is you have spoken out about the situation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but nobody lost money here. In other words, there may have been some clerical errors, but everybody was made whole. Correct?
Yeah, up to almost 90%. And to be honest, if they wouldn't have done what they did to our house, everybody would have been made whole. Like, because I could have easily pulled out cash from the house they took and tried to profit off of in a foreclosure sale. I mean, we had over $1 million of equity at that time. And I mean, that other 10% could have been paid back, but even attorneys were telling us we were still eligible for the PPP. It was just the advice from this loan originator saying to use projections. It was an inflated amount. So we were still, if they would have given us the correct information, we were probably still entitled to a majority amount of that loan. But from their errors, and we kept bringing that up, and the AUSA did not want to hear it. I mean, he had his target. I don't think he wanted to go for the bigger fish. He wanted the low-hanging fruit to, you know, just have another win under his belt. So
I've seen this in many, many occasions. There is not much mercy or much reason in this case, victimless financial crime, where I think, based on advice that you got from a professional, appears that financial errors were made, but there was no intent to defraud here, and nobody lost money. They would have lost no money had they not seized your only asset. It has to be particularly difficult, your wife having now gotten out of custody as you going in. It had to be hard enough for you to see her incarcerated and then on home confinement. But how is she dealing with this, putting the boys aside?
You know, it was an adjustment. I mean, as you know, I think you kind of helped boost some posts when we were trying to get her approved to go to Washington, D.C. for the Weaponized Watch event that was on June 11th, and she literally only got off her ankle monitor on the 8th, and her probation officer said, no, not at all. And then I threw out a Hail Mary pass, and the judge actually emergency approved it, which I was completely shocked. Even my attorney, Bill Shipley, said, I don't think he's going to approve it. I know Judge Seabright. And the judge actually did something honorable. But, I mean, that was the first time she was in D.C. 3 days after being stuck at home for almost 2.5 months. It was an adjustment just being around people, especially in that kind of environment. So it's been an adjustment, but every day is better. And, you know, she's worried. I mean, she doesn't want me to go in. I mean, we own our own business. And before this all happened, before she went in, we kind of had our own roles. You know, I was doing this amount of stuff. She was doing more of the back end work, bookkeeping, marketing, all that stuff to grow the business. And now there's stuff she's going to have to do that I don't even know if she can physically, because it does take physical strength. And, you know, there is a difference between a male's body and a female's body. So there is that issue at hand that we're trying to figure out right now before I go in. But I mean, like I said before, some days feel like we're back to our normal family. And I told her when she was gone, like, I mean, you're married, besides maybe taking trips to DC, you're used to your wife, waking up to your wife, going to sleep to your wife. I mean, Aaron and I give each other a kiss every night, hold hand in bed while we watch TV, just to relax. Like, that was gone. That's something that you don't think of as being the person on the outside, is that day to day. I mean, I would find myself just talking to myself during the day because I didn't have her, because we have a unique relationship where we are kind of always together because we work together, and then we're best friends. Like, we love each other, and it's when that's gone, you don't think about that when you're on this side, and it's even worse, when you're went through what she's went through and what I'm about ready to go through, being in a bunk bed that, nobody would ever want to sleep on, and you're around no family except for a couple phone calls a week. So it's definitely an adjustment that we're trying to go through as strong as possible.
Well, in Bill Shipley, you have a very fine lawyer, one of the best lawyers. You could not have a better advocate. We're going to have to take a quick break here, but when we return, I'll continue to talk to Chris Mazzei about this horrific ordeal that he and his wife and family are going through. Folks, don't go away. We'll be right back. This is Roger Stone, and it's time for protecting your future. When uncertainty rises, smart investors look for stability. For generations, precious metals like gold and silver have helped protect purchasing power through inflation, market swings, economic uncertainty, and turbulence. Learn how precious metals can help diversify and protect what matters most to you, your financial future. Start building your financial foundation today by going to dyingdollar.com. That's dyingdollar.com. One more time, dyingdollar.com. You'll be glad you did. Welcome back into the Stone Zone. We're talking to my good friend Chris Mazzei. He is facing a relentless case of lawfare, he and his wife, and has a due date to turn himself in for federal custody on August 20th. Chris, for 18 months, instead of just curling up and accepting this, you've been fighting in every creative way and getting attention to your case, even the way we met, actually. You've been to D.C. a couple times telling your story. I've seen you out there on other media outlets and advocating your family and also other families. All of this, of course, is out of your own pocket, never paying big-time lobbyists or high-priced attorneys. It's interesting. I have advocated for pardons for President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who, make no mistake about it, the former president of Honduras was framed by the Biden administration. He's not a narco-trafficker. By the way, there's a 9-part series published at artvoice.com where you can see that. Also, New York police officer Mike McMahon, state legislator and Judge Michelle Fiore in Nevada, Rod Blagojevich, the former governor of Illinois, and of course, Virginia Sheriff Scott Howard Jenkins, never being paid a penny for any of that advocacy. In every case, working on those cases as an advocate, because I believed that those people were abused by the system. That's how I feel about your case. On top of everything, your parents are elderly. You're supporting them as well. What does this possible incarceration mean for your parents' care?
Yeah, so to start off first, and I probably have to apologize because I've been on other programs and I kind of told people how I reached out to you, and I don't know if your cameo has blown up, but just so people know, I I reached out to Roger on Cameo. God, I forget if it was January or February of last year. It was right after Aaron went in. And to the extent of your credit, you denied my Cameo. You didn't even want the $110 or $20, whatever it was. And then you DM'd me with your cell phone number and said, I don't want your money. I want to help you take down these bastards that took down me. So I will back you up on any time anyone says anything negative about you. And I know half the people that you just mentioned, Rod Blagojevich, I've met him multiple times. He's a great guy. And actually Martha Burns and I have been texting a lot, even as of this morning. And you helped her husband as well. My parents, yeah, they, my father, or my stepdad, he's basically in his late stage of dealing with Parkinson's disease. And he actually just spent the past week in the hospital due to complications from it. He's back home, and I'm actually literally at their house right now doing this interview because he needed help getting in the shower. And my mom's, as you mentioned earlier, is 78 years old. She dealing with rheumatoid arthritis and other issues and complications just due to that. They need 24-hour care, and that kind of is on my shoulders right now. We're hopefully this week, Bill Shipley, who I have to actually credit, he just became my lawyer about a month or so ago, and it was actually the help of Cynthia Hughes on that, because all the lawyers before that were just garbage. And Bill is a straight shooter and whatnot, but he hopefully will be filing to try and get me an extension to help me get them situated in my absence, because there's nobody else around here to take care of them. And adding on top of that, my mom's sister just passed away about a couple months ago, and she's got to deal with the estate, selling the house, which once that's done, that will actually help to have them financially a little more secure to get somebody in for helping.
Folks, the very best thing we can do right now is to pray. Pray for Chris Mazzei and his wife, Erin. Welcome back into the Stone Zone here on the Roger Stone Show. Something has happened over the last several weeks that is really extraordinary. They're calling it, the Wall Street Journal and in the Daily Wire, they're calling it Nixonmaxxing. Really kicked off when Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library, made the accurate observation that President Richard Nixon was taken down by the same deep state forces and interests that tried to take down President Donald Trump. And when that was combined with some very skillful use of the internet by the young crew at the Nixon Foundation, using memes, short videos on YouTube, Instagram, X, and so on, it has sparked an extraordinary revival and re-examination, not just of the circumstances of Watergate, but also of the incredible accomplishments of the Nixon administration. Joining me now is probably someone better to speak about those issues than anyone in the country today. Ken Khachigian was a trusted advisor, counselor, and speechwriter to both presidents, Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. He's also a political strategist. He's more than just a scribe, as our late friend Nick Ruey would say. He's responsible for the election of George Deukmejian as governor of California, probably responsible for every major Republican victory in the last half century in the state of California. He's written an extraordinary book entitled In Behind Closed Doors, In the Room with Reagan and Nixon. I've written 2 books on Nixon. This is far superior to either of the books that I have written. If you are interested in politics, and if you love Reagan or Nixon or both, I cannot recommend the book highly enough to you. You can go to ReaganandNixon.com to order your copy, but we'll get to that. Ken Khachigian, welcome back in the Stone Zone.
Thanks, Roger. Always great to be with you.
Look, Ken, you are someone that I looked up to in the Nixon campaign. I was originally the chairman of Youth for Nixon, state of Connecticut, and then have the privilege of being a gopher for John Mitchell at the 1968 Republican Convention in Miami. Later went to work for Ronald Reagan in his 1976 campaign. Then, of course, in his 1980 campaign, and then his 1984 re-election campaign. You are someone I always admired and looked up to as a strategist, as a thinker, not just a wordsmith, but you got to see both of these men up close in a far closer quarters than I did. I think we both recognize their greatness. It's funny because with President Nixon in his post-presidential years, when I was working on his schedule and just doing general errands for him, both Monica Crowley, now serves as the U.S. ambassador to protocol, and I assured him that the day would come when his presidency would be reevaluated. He seemed skeptical, but lo and behold, here we are. What do you think?
Well, that's absolutely true. You know, your listeners should know that in my advanced years would reconcile before it, because I was in the 1968 campaign as a young law student at Columbia, and I hired by Pat Buchanan, the legendary conservative, and then worked for Alan Greenspan in that 1968 campaign. He was my boss as a domestic policy advisor. I was a research assistant, and then of course went into the White House under President Nixon. But when he resigned after Watergate, then he asked me to come out to work for him in the Western White House after his resignation, and we did his post his recovery years after Watergate. But one of the first things he said to me when I got out there, Roger, was, and this is amazing lesson for all those young people. He said, we can't look back, Ken. We've got to look forward. We've got to put Watergate behind us and look to the future. We can't wallow in this and just think about the past. He was always forward-looking, and he had in his mind that we were going to overcome all the tragedies. That he was greater. He was above it all. He was above the small men and women that tried to take him down. He was bigger than they were, even back then in 1974 and 1975, when they were trying to defeat him. They were trying to disbar him in New York and California. They were trying to. They were going after his tax returns. I was trying to help him recover financially. He had obviously had no income anymore. They tried to take away his property in Florida. They were landing subpoenas in San Clemente left and right. I was an attorney back then trying to help him out with that. It was just one horror after another. They were just trying to destroy the man, even after he had resigned. But back then, we'd already began not plotting it, obviously, but there was going to be a slow return, and we knew the day would come. And then when he helped me make a contact with the Reagan campaign in 1980, and then allowed me to be his secret intermediary with Ronald Reagan, which I document in detail in my book. When people read my book, that nobody knew about, that Nixon was counseling Reagan in the 1980 campaign with secret memos that I passed along to Reagan, and in secret conversations that I had with Nixon that I passed along to Reagan. Nixon was showing his brilliant political mind, and it was part of that great comeback that he started. So, and now here it is, 40 years later, 45 years later, the comeback is making its fruition justifiably.
Yeah, the great beauty of this, I can just tell you from a commercial point of view, I wrote a controversial book on the Kennedy assassination. It became a New York Times bestseller, still does quite well. I wrote 2 books on President Nixon. Unfortunately, up until now, the issue of Watergate has been like a decided issue. Oh, he was a paranoid criminal. He was a horrific person. He was a crook. And it has obscured any focus on the amazing accomplishments of his presidency. And I myself have to admit, I wondered, after pounding away at this for a decade, whether his historical record would ever get the fair assessment that it so richly deserves. And now, in a strange way, Vice President Vance, with his comments, and this very innovative crew at the Nixon Foundation have found an entirely new audience to reassess which was an extraordinary record. A strategic arms limitation agreement with the Soviets, saving Israel from absolute destruction in the 1973 Yom Kippur War over the objections of Dr. Kissinger. Opening the door to China at a time that China was a dirt poor, backwards agrarian society where most people didn't have indoor plumbing nor rural electricity. 30 years before Bill Clinton gave them most favored nation trading status extended by George W. Bush, which is what ultimately makes them the dangerous enemy and superpower that they are today. The 18-year-old vote, the end of the military draft, the desegregation of the public schools. Few people know that Richard Nixon appointed more African Americans to federal office than LBJ and JFK combined. But you could never get anyone to focus on that extraordinary record because all they wanted to talk about was Watergate. Now I think we have transcended Watergate, and the Nixon record is getting the fair assessment that it deserves.
Well, and that's absolutely correct, and that's part of it. But the other part of it is that they're finally, thanks in great part to my colleague Jeff Shepard, who has exposed a lot of the ethical corruption of the Watergate years by the people who were attacking President Nixon. We now know that Judge Sirica was the most corrupt judge that we've ever had in Washington, D.C. during those years, who was having secret meetings with the prosecutors without any defendants in the courtroom. He was meeting with the chief prosecutor to set up meetings with the appeals court judges so that all of his rulings could not be overruled by the appeals court. And then my friend Shepard has documented 8 or 9 secret meetings where the prosecutors, Cox and Jaworski and other of his prosecutorial team, had secret meetings with the judge. Now, this is Soviet-style stuff, Roger, where prosecutors meet with the judge, with the defendant's lawyers not in the courtroom. This is stuff that happens in societies, in totalitarian societies where defendants have no rights. That's one part of what we're looking at. The second part of what we're looking at is like that which is recorded in my book, and that is Nixon's brilliance, which has emerged over the years in the secret memos that he sent to Reagan that shows his political brilliance. He, in these memos he wrote in advice to Reagan, Nixon was the probably the most brilliant political strategist we've had in the Cold War era. When he wasn't involved in his own campaigns, when he in his analytical advice that he gave to Reagan was just absolutely magnificent, as documented in 2 brilliant memos in the 80 campaign and subsequently in the 84 campaign, giving advice to Reagan on debates, and then subsequently advising him during his presidency. And those are in the appendix of my book that people will find fascinating.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Ken Khachigian. He's the author of Behind Closed Doors, In the Room with Reagan and Nixon. You can get that by going to ReaganandNixon.com. That's ReaganandNixon.com. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back with more of Ken Khachigian. Welcome back into the Stone Zone here on the Roger Stone Show. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Ken Khachigian, one of the true heavyweights of the Republican Party of the last half century, both a trusted advisor, counselor, and speechwriter for both Presidents Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. I had the most opportunity to spend time with Governor Ronald Reagan in the 1976 campaign because, well, we were a small, hardy band of radicals, and I got to see the greatness of the man. Now, Clark Clifford later was Treasury Secretary under Truman, later got jammed up in a giant banking scandal, once referred to Ronald Reagan as an amiable dunce, which shows that he didn't know the man at all. Ken Khachigian was part of the team brought in to save Ronald Reagan's 1980 campaign. He's truly one of the architects of Reagan's 1980 victory, riding the plane there in the thick of the battle. Ken, I want to spend the rest of the time we have left here, just a few minutes, focusing on, well, the greatness of Ronald Reagan. You and I got to go all the way across Ohio by train in one of the great campaigns of all time. But reflect, if you would, on President Reagan.
Oh, I couldn't imagine a greater experience. Of course, than those years with Reagan, and Nixon was great too. They were two great men, and of course, in chapter 25 of my book describes the meeting between those two great giants. But that time with Reagan, I had in traveling with him in the 1980 campaign, where we took Jimmy Carter out of office, and of course, traveling with him on Air Force One in 1984. Where I describe in my book the 84 re-election campaign. All the time I had with Reagan, I think I developed such a close bond with him. He was such a gentleman. We had a great sense of humor. He could tell a story, crack a joke, but then there was a serious side to him, Roger, that people didn't realize that he could be really tough. He was very competitive. There was a time there when Walter Mondale got under his skin in 1984. He took me aside, basically said, I'm tired of those attacks on me, Ken, and he didn't say it in those words, but he was tired of being Mr. Nice Guy. And that's when we had that whistle stop tour through Ohio, where you were on the team there with us, Roger, and he asked me to write a really tough speech, taking Walter Mondale's hide off. And but the other thing about Reagan, everybody should know about, was his deep feeling about the economy and how it was totally overregulated. The taxes were too high. The people were being robbed of their innovation, and the taxes were taking them all the energy out of their lives, and that their hard work was being punished. And those are the kind of things I describe as well in my book. But this man knew a lot about economics. He was a wonderful writer. He was a great writer. I was a speechwriter, but sometimes I was just his editor, because he knew how to turn a phrase. He was a great communicator, because in all those years when he was out of office, he traveled the country on his own, writing his own speeches. So he taught me a lot about speech writing, about communicating. He especially felt strongly about how to bring peace to the world, and it wasn't just bringing Mr. Nice Guy with the Soviet Union. He wanted to do it by bringing them to their knees, by building up the defense system that Jimmy Carter had just totally destroyed, and by building a new
Ken, I got to
navy,
cut
by
you off
building up
there.
our defenses.
I got to cut you off there, folks. Go to ReaganandNixon.com, ReaganandNixon.com. Grab a copy of Ken's book, Behind Closed Doors in the Room with Reagan and Nixon. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to the Stone Zone here on the Roger Stone Show. So in breaking news, several tankers have been hit, evidently by landmines in the Black Sea and the Straits of Hormuz. So far, no reports of loss of life, but substantial damage. If we get more news on that, we will update you. Next, we're going to go to what we call our political roundtable. Joining me for this segment of the Stone Zone, right here on the Roger Stone Show, is Troy Smith, the editor-in-chief of Slingshot.news. Troy, welcome back into the Stone Zone.
Roger, as always, it's an honor to be with you.
So I don't know where to start. I must admit, even I am surprised. As you know, I unfortunately had a falling out with the investigative journalist Laura Loomer. We were for many years good friends. I did consider her like a daughter, and we fell out when she, for reasons I still don't quite understand, tried to smear and destroy Tulsi Gabbard, the woman who declassified, as the director of national intelligence, the documents that proved that the Russian collusion narrative was a seditious conspiracy and a hoax. Tulsi Gabbard, who proved that the impeachment over an alleged phone call that President Trump made to the Ukrainian President Zelensky was yet another contrived hoax. On her way out the door, Tulsi Gabbard proved that Dr. Anthony Fauci had lied repeatedly about the origins and development of the COVID-19 vaccination. So to me, Tulsi Gabbard is a hero. Tulsi Gabbard did great service for this administration before resigning to tend to a gravely ill husband, and she didn't deserve the kind of vicious personal attacks that Laura Loomer issued on her. And unfortunately, after a long friendship, we fell out about that. I think a lot of it had to do, of course, with the fact that I favored giving peace a chance. Don't accuse me of being soft on Islamic terrorism or radical jihad or radical Islam. I'm not. In fact, I applaud the recent remarks by Sid Rosenberg, who's absolutely right in his comments on Fox the other day. So, and I know, having known Donald Trump since 1988, he has always been consistent since 1988 that the Iranian regime, the brutal Iranian regime, cannot have, must not have, will not have nuclear weapons. But in this case, Laura Loomer seems to have done a complete 180. I mean, she clearly recognizes that Zelensky is in league with neo-Nazis, clearly in league with the Azov battalion. She's been one of his harshest critics. Now suddenly she tells us, after an interview with Zelensky, that she's completely changed her views on this endless war, and she supports the Ukrainians, whose invasion by the Russians is caused by the ongoing efforts by the Biden administration, in violation of two different treaties that we signed, to push Ukraine into NATO. What do you think's going on here with Laura Loomer?
Well, Roger, this is a specific case, and we're talking about the specific nature of Ukraine's relationship with the United States and what Laura Loomer's interview or any kind of news relating to that interview how that may impact world events here going forward, Roger. And I still think when it comes to Ukraine, we don't have a full picture on their involvement on several issues. One issue I wanted to raise today was the issue of Ryan Ruth, who on September 15th, 2024, attempted to assassinate President Donald Trump at his West Palm Beach golf course, using a Soviet rifle, by the way. Ruth has ties to Ukraine in the boldest of ways, Roger. He actually traveled to Kiev in 2022 to protest the Russian offensive. He came within 400 yards of assassinating President Donald Trump at his West Palm Beach golf course, and he actively recruited veterans for the Ukraine war efforts in the United States. So he was reaching out to former military veterans, telling them they needed to go fight for Ukraine. He was actively involved in this. So this is a guy that nearly assassinated President Donald Trump. He's in prison for life plus, I believe, 86 months now because of that assassination attempt, and we still don't really know his exact involvement with Ukraine. This is just one example, Roger. You briefly mentioned the Ukrainian impeachment scandal. That was the first Trump impeachment. Now, I wanted to talk about that briefly as well, because doing some research into that and the call that surrounded that, Roger, after President Trump asked Zelensky to look into Hunter Biden's ties with Burisma and Joe Biden's threatening to fire prosecutors and withholding aid, Zelensky appointed a prosecutor called Ruslan Ryobo-Shapku to investigate Burisma's Hunter Biden deal. And despite direct evidence that Hunter had zero qualifications to serve on the board of that Ukrainian energy company, he had no relevant regional experience, no relevancy to the company other than the fact that his father was vice president at the time. And additionally here, Roger, there's video evidence of Joe Biden directly saying he threatened to withhold aid from Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor that was investigating the company, paying his son $50,000 a month. So Zelensky appoints a prosecutor to look into this. They find nothing. It's basically just, here, President Trump, look, we investigated, but we didn't find anything. They leave that part out. And what happens in the aftermath of that call, Roger, that impeachment? Zelensky goes on to be one of Biden's greatest allies on the world stage and siphoned $110 billion, billions of dollars that Ukraine would not survive without. He siphons that from the U.S. taxpayers and goes on to campaign against President Donald Trump in 2024. So if you ask me, Roger, there's no way that anybody that could support President Donald Trump, that could claim to be one of his greatest supporters, could then turn around and say Zelensky is one of the best people, when Zelensky was intricately involved in the impeachment scandal. Not only that, but he's also campaigning against President Donald Trump in 2024. And there's even more angles to this to get in, Roger, but I want to get your reaction to this long storied history of Ukraine working against America, working against Americans, and specifically President Donald Trump.
And working with neo-Nazis. Laura Loomer confronted Ukrainian Nazis in Orlando. I was worried about her safety that day, as a matter of fact. But now this is a complete reversal. Reading from The Hill, far-right influencer Laura Loomer met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday after publicly reversing her long-held and outspoken opposition to backing Ukraine in this war with Russia, expressing support for the country in a visit to Kyiv. Now, just to be very clear, I am for Ukraine. I'm neither for Ukraine nor for Russia. I had members of my own family mowed down by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956. So I'm not carrying any brief here for the Russians. I'd like to see an end to this war. But I do think that there's epic corruption in Ukraine. I have serious questions about whether the billions of dollars that we've spent on this war have been used in the war, whether they ended up in the pockets of politicians, either in Ukraine or in the United States. There are reports online that Laura Loomer was paid something like $1.3 million for this interview. I want to be very clear. I am not saying that. There are reports saying that. They're unconfirmed. We don't know if that's true, but they appear to be credible sources. It's hard for me to understand what else could get you to change your long-held position. This is one issue in which Laura Loomer and I were completely and totally aligned. We are now no longer aligned. I'm on neither side. I'm not for the Ukrainians, nor am I for the Russians. I'm for an end to the war. I'm for an end to the killing. This is a meat grinder, and it is being caused by the insistence of our NATO allies and the Biden administration attempting to push Ukraine into NATO in violation of the Budapest Memorandum, in violation of the Minsk Accords, in the violation of numerous agreements that we have made. Now, I have said in my criticism of Laura Loomer that I believe that there are instances where she's been paid. I have never said she's paid by Israel. I've never said she's paid by a foreign policy. I do think that this is checkbook journalism. I do think that you shouldn't call yourself an independent investigative journalist if your comments are being paid for by anyone. There are Foreign Agents Registration Acts. I have some clients for whom I have to file. I do not communicate on social media on their behalf. And if I did, I would be required to disclose that I have done so, but I have not done so. And I'm not going to play these receipt games with Laura Loomer, where she takes my advocacy for a pardon for someone, and then months later I advocate a change in the state law or the federal law under which they were charged, and call that lobbying because it's not, doesn't even fit in the same time sequence. So I do find this pretty shocking, and I just wonder what would cause Laura Loomer, who's quoted here as saying, I just had my first experience in a air raid in Ukraine. I feel like such an a-hole for minimizing the struggle of Ukrainians for the last 5 years. I often say I don't care. Looking back, that wasn't very nice of me to say. This is a complete reversal of her position. It's very hard to understand.
Well, and Roger, I want to throw in an angle here that I think people are missing out on, and it's important, that the number one trading partner that Ukraine has in this entire world is China. And they send about $8 billion worth of grain and raw earth materials to China on a yearly basis. So China has a vested interest in keeping Ukraine going. And if you look at the assets in the United States, we talked about Mitch McConnell last week, and we've talked about many others here on the show, those people always tend to support Ukraine. And when we look at Joe Biden and his policies toward China and the way that China was able to assert itself on the national stage when Biden was president and as this conflict escalated, I think we have to look at it and say, okay, what do we actually know about the pretext to this conflict, and what actually pushed these nations to this, like you said, a meat grinder where hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives, perhaps eventually even millions. It is terrible, Roger. And like you, I just want to see an end to this war. And I hate seeing on both sides, Zelensky being one of the main culprits, people stoking violence, getting more people killed. The killing has to stop.
Well, and they shouldn't try to tell us this is about democracy. Volodymyr Zelensky has closed down monasteries, has had priests and pastors beaten and tortured, has shut down churches, has harassed clerics, has postponed all elections, all Democratic elections, with a small d. So don't try to tell us it's about democracy. And for Loomer and Zelensky to talk about their interview being a defense of Christianity, as my friend Todd Wood over at CDM in the Skiff pointed out, that is based on the history that is laughable, absolutely laughable. When we come back, I want to talk to you about one of the hottest congressional races in the country. These midterm elections are looking extraordinarily competitive. I'm a bit more optimistic than some. It is still early in politics. This election is not tomorrow. We're at the beginning of the summer. But very soon we will be locked into a situation. The election is looking very competitive. I want to focus on Florida's 7th District, Corey Mills, who still has an endorsement from the president, but seems to be facing more uphill problems with news this past week that he is the target of a federal investigation. I do want to note for the record that he denies that, and when you are the target of a federal investigation, federal investigators don't confirm it, but several credible news outlets have claimed that he is the target of federal investigations. We know for definite that he is investigations of an ethics investigation. My concern in the nutshell, if he is the Republican nominee in this leaning Republican district, I fear the district will be lost in a year in which Republicans cannot afford to lose any district. And we'll come back and talk about that on the other side. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to my friend Troy Smith, editor and publisher of slingshot.news, and we'll be right back with more on the 2026 elections now that we have addressed the question of Laura Loomer's 180-degree about-face regarding the epically corrupt President Zelensky of Ukraine. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back for our final segment in the Stone Zone, right here on the Roger Stone Show. We're listening to my good friend Troy Smith, the editor-in-chief of Slingshot.news. Before we leave, Laura Loomer, the investigative journalist, the allegedly independent investigative journalist, there were two things here I did like. She did bust Volodymyr Zelensky's chops for not wearing a suit when he goes to meet with Donald Trump. I agree with that. If he can wear a suit to the World Economic Forum meetings, he can wear a suit to the White House. It's a simple sign of respect. Then secondarily, and this is just kind of funny, she did have the audacity to ask him whether, based on the video that I think everyone around the world saw, he had snorted cocaine with the head of France, Macron. And of course, Zelensky said, absolutely not. In other words, don't believe what your eyes see, believe what I told you. Pretty funny.
Absolutely, Roger. And there were some good moments, and you have to, you have to give her credit there for asking some tough questions. But at the same time, when it's accompanied with just the overall, talk about Zelensky and how great Ukraine is, I think that has to be countered with the truth. And we were talking about it before the break, going into Corey Mills and this investigation. I think, when we talk about investigative reporting and work we've done here, Roger, on just Corey Mills and exposing the past ethics violations and things of that nature, the fact that a girlfriend was granted a restraining order against Corey Mills, and he lied to the president about that in order to receive his endorsement under false pretenses. When you examine all these things, Roger, that we've revealed here on the show, and the fact that an investigation has been launched, I think it's important to highlight that this is why the work is important, and this is why when work is influenced by monetary influences and people are coming in and paying you to say certain things, not that we're alleging anything of that nature, just that happens on a routine basis. That's why it's so important that this stuff comes from a legitimate place. And when we look at Corey Mills' race, I think you've highlighted this is an area where Republicans are going to struggle, because we have a Republican who has lied his way into this race and has repeatedly misrepresented himself. There's stories about him falsifying records for a Bronze Star. The man who supposedly gave it to him has no recollection of ever signing anything to award Corey Mills the Bronze Star. Roger, this is a race that I know you've been really watching closely, and that it seems like a self-inflicted wound that Corey Mills could fix by just simply being honest about his history here.
Yeah, look, I can understand why he might not want to resign. The Republicans need that vote. They need that seat in the House, but he could simply announce that he's not running for re-election. He would still be in office until next January. The Florida Republican primary is coming up August 18th. He's facing, as you point out, a myriad of issues. The three other military guys whose lives he claims that he saved have no recollection of that. There are serious questions about the financing of his first campaign. There are at least two women that he allegedly abused. One of them who did go get a warrant from a federal judge, a warrant or an order of protection, which, as you point out, he lied to President Trump. He circumvented the White House political operation. So those who blame the White House staff for this endorsement or the White House political operation don't know the history of it. And I think it's going to be a good year in Florida to be a Republican. I think Byron Donalds will be strong at the head of the ticket. I do think he's going to run away with the Republican primary for governor, despite a lot of online chatter. People have to wake up to the fact that X and the blogosphere, that's not the real world. The average Republican primary voter in the Sunshine State is 65 plus. They are not hanging on X every minute or Instagram or TikTok or Venmo or I would say any other of these internet sites to get their political news. They're getting their political news more likely from cable, from the mail, from the phone, and text messages, and that's what affects the real world. So I would keep a close eye on the 7th District race. There's no evidence that Corey Mills is going to drop, and I think that will make this seat, if he survives the primary, which is not at all definite,